Hello everyone, this is part 6 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto stood in the archway where the hallway opened up from its narrow passage onto a slightly more open part of the hallway that had the entrance to the eastern courtyard and another exit to the Hyuga's private gardens. Blocking his passage were the 5 heads of Konoha's most renowned clans. Uzumaki. Tsume breathed out as her loyal companion. Kodomaru growled and snarled at the boy in red. Naruto looked at them with an intensely disinterested gaze before he spoke. Akamaki, Nara, Yamanaka, Inuzuka. The 4 of you need not die here. You need only to swear loyalty to me, and my cause, and you will be allowed safe passage away from this compound. Should you prove yourselves trustworthy, then I will allow you to once again take the position of clan heads of your respective houses. And Hiashi? Shikito asked, narrowing his eyes slightly. Naruto's gaze flickered to the pale-eyed clan head. He is too dangerous to be left alive, was his simple answer. Shikito mentally cursed. Hiashi was indeed the only true threat to the blonde. Not in raw power, he doubted anyone short of one or both of the remaining Sannin, or Uchiha Itachi had any real hope of defeating this monstrosity that they had created. Hiashi's threat was in the political realm. Shikito knew that no matter how much pull or influence he had in certain circles of shinobi, that no one had the kind of political pull like Hiashi. Where the blonde held his force together by grudging respect, fear, or people who were indebted to him, Hiashi held his force together by 3 things. 1. The natural prestige he possessed as the Hyuga clan head, diminished as they may be. 2. His calculative mind. And 3rd, the fact that many believed him to be the last hope of defeating the blonde before he starts yet another great war. Shikito knew also that should they submit to him, that he would limit, or downright remove all of their political power, meaning that the chances of one of them coming close to organizing a revolt would be nigh impossible. So, in reality, this was it. This was a make-it-or-break-it effort to keep their children from having to suffer the horrors of war. He weighed his options. Should they fail or surrender, then Naruto would no doubt pursue his ambition, and eventually fail when 2 of the villages united against his now diminished one, which would lead to the destruction of the Hidden Leaf and all of its inhabitants, including their children. Or they could make a stand, have the possibility of failing but also have the possibility of winning, where then they could name a new cage, unite the village again and work on undoing the damage that this short, but nonetheless destructive, civil war had caused. Hiashi spoke up, narrowing his pale eyes to a fearsome glare. Fool boy. You cannot hope to defeat us here. We are 5 of Konoha's strongest shinobi. You are strong, true, remarkably so, but even you have no chance of defeating all of 5 of us. Tsume spoke up next. Not only that, but our clan techniques complement each other. The Hyuga and Inuzuka have been paired in teams practically since the founding of our clans, and the Ino Shika Cho trio is legendary. Naruto spoke, his voice a drawl of simple facts. Inuzuka clan techniques are based around close-range combat. Weaknesses are mid to long-range techniques. Usually earth-type manipulators. Hyuga also focuses on close-range techniques. Weaknesses, a blind spot just along the base of the neck. Akamaki, also close-range fighters. Weaknesses, techniques use up great amounts of chakra and are extremely slow. Yamanaka clan techniques, involving the mind, mid to close-range techniques. Weaknesses is that the caster will either fall unconscious, or must remain perfectly still while the jutsu is being cast. The jutsu moves very slowly as well. And finally the Nara, the clan strengths are the unusually high IQs as well as the ability to paralyze an opponent using shadows. Weaknesses are that they have naturally low chakra capacities and the paralysis uses greater amounts of chakra the stronger the opponent. Did I leave anything? The 5 clan heads' facial expressions visibly tightened. When they had created him, trained him, they had given him everything, they had laid out all of Konoha's knowledge, all of its techniques. The techniques of the clans and their weaknesses. In the hopes of creating the perfect weapon, one that could help any of the clans, or who could destroy any that might have gone rouge. But in the process they forgot one thing. When handling any weapon there was always a risk of gaining serious injuries. Hiashi growled and spat out his next words. You still do not have a chance. Your theories are good, but let's see you put them into practice. Naruto spoke again, his voice hollow and dead even as his red eyes gleamed beneath his hood. While it is true that I would have no chance at defeating you if I was a normal shinobi, we all know that I am far from normal. The 5 clan heads tensed as the red chakra grew in intensity. The bloodlust and rage rolling off of the beast's power was almost suffocating. Naruto spoke again, his red eyes flashing beneath his hood and glowing with an eerie light. The will of the shadow guides me. The strength of the demon empowers me, you cannot prevail. His voice grew darker then, the voice-altering device making it sound more like a feral growl of some animal. Chooser, having had enough, rushed the blonde and aimed a massive fist towards him. But Naruto merely leapt straight up, busting a hole through the ceiling where Sume and Kodomaru soon followed up after him. The Inuzuka clan head barely had time to land on the ceiling before she heard a voice coming from above. Kase no Yaiba. She snapped her head up just as a crescent-shaped wind blade headed straight towards her. She couldn't leap off the roof before the chunk she had been standing on fell as the wind blade cut through wood and stone, sending her crashing down into the other 4 clan heads. Naruto then formed his next set of hand seals. Kaiten, Ryuka no Jutsu. He yelled, shooting out 6 fireballs. 5 hit the roof of the house and the last was aimed to go into the opening he had made. Just as the ball of flames was about to enter the building and fry the remaining occupants, a shout was heard from the inside. Kaiten. A whole chunk of the house's east wing was blown to bits, flaming debris and splinters of wood exploding everywhere. Somehow, Hiashi had managed to form the chitin to move around the others, yet still make it powerful enough to push away the attack. Naruto landed and then had to leap back as Chooser attacked, his fists the size of giant mallets. His feet touched the ground again as Hiashi appeared in front of him, his movements fast and precise, his Juken stance practically perfect. Naruto moved from side to side, avoiding the man's attacks rather easily. When he heard a bark behind him, he turned in time just to barely catch Kodomaru's form as he barreled into him, spinning with the Inuzuka's signature Suga. He managed to mold chakra into his back, just in time to avoid most of the serious damage, reducing the tearing, bludgeoning force to a strong impact. Hiashi, having seen the dog's attack before the blonde due to his Byakugan, leapt back just as the dog hit the Jinchuriki, sending the ninja straight for him. He began spinning. Kaiten. Naruto slammed into the defensive technique, sent spinning through the air. He managed to gain his bearings and looked in time to see himself heading towards the Akamaiki. Chooser's fists were reared back, ready to deliver a clapping motion that would no doubt crush him between the ridiculously proportioned hands. He timed his maneuver and placed his palm on the earth, bringing himself to a screeching halt, practically laying on the floor as Chooser's hands clapped together, loudly above his head. He pushed himself off the floor, somersaulting backwards. He landed behind the Akamite clan head. He grabbed the man by his hair, pulling him back while he himself moved forward and delivered a brutal kick to his spine. Chooser's mouth opened with a silent scream of pain. Naruto reared back his blade, poised to deliver the killing blow when he realized that he suddenly couldn't move. His blood-red eyes shifted to the shadow that connected with his eyes then shifted to the struggling Shikito, as he pulled more of the volatile red chakra from his seal. Shikito fell to one knee, grunting in exertion. Sweat dabbed his forehead. Onoiki. He panted. Hurry the fuck up. He managed to gasp out as the red chakra struggled against his jutsu. Right, the blonde-haired member of the team spoke as he finished his hand seals. His form didn't slump, but the spike in the blonde-haired man's chakra indicated the attack had been sent. Naruto forcefully pulled out more of Kyuubi's chakra from the seal, the red violent chakra thrashing against Shikito's hold. He could feel Onoiki's attack getting closer and closer. He could not grant the full control of his mind. The results for both of them would be less than pleasing. His salvation came in a rather surprising yet painful form. Chooser, having managed to gain his bearings, felt the rather strong grip on his hair that Naruto still had and spun around. Acting on instinct, he lashed out, growing his arm to ridiculous proportions. The enlarged appendage slammed into Naruto's side, sending him flying, while also cracking a few ribs. This, however, proved to be a real problem for one Nara Shikito, as he too felt the effects of the attack. While he didn't go flying, he did feel the snapping of his ribs. Naruto landed on all fours, grunting slightly as he focused Kyuubi's chakra. Hearing the sound of snapping bones slightly muffled, he knew they were healed again, but that didn't mean Shikito was all right. The scarred man was clutching his side with a dribble of blood coming from the corner of his mouth. Naruto stood but felt a rumble beneath his feet. He managed to shift his position to the side just in time to avoid Kodomaru as he emerged from the ground already using a Suga. He was unable to completely avoid Sume however, as the Inu Kanoiki came from the ground behind him. He managed to dodge somewhat, but the clan head knocked away his sword and delivered 3 jagged claw-like slashes across his chest. He grunted and kicked Kodomaru as the dog lunged at him from behind. Sume landed on the ground, he was slightly behind her to her left. She spun around, trying to deliver an elbow to his face with her left arm, he blocked it almost lazily, she tried again, this time with her right arm, he blocked again. Now gripping both her elbows in his hand, he roughly jerked his hands downwards, now gripping her wrists and twisted her arms behind her back. The woman grit her teeth refusing to cry out, a sickening pop sound was heard and her left shoulder bone seemed to move beneath her skin, indicating it was now dislocated. A gasp of pain escaped her. He didn't let up, and her resistance with her right arm increased, not wanting it to suffer the same pain as its twin. Snaps and crunches were heard as his grip tightened around her left wrist, it was now, no doubt, broken. She still didn't cry out, nor did the resistance in her right arm falter for a second, her teeth were gritted against her lower lip so much that blood appeared. Naruto was forced to release her however as Heihachi dashed onto the scene, his taijutsu, again fast and deliberate. Naruto pushed chakra into his gauntlets, blocking the famed gentle fist with precision and sureness of one who knew the style inside out. Heihachi gnashed his teeth as again, a palm thrust to the boy's shoulder was diverted, followed by another to his upper chest, and again to his stomach. He was using all the speed he could muster and yet still this boy was batting him away like nothing more than a mere fly. Finally, after several more blows were exchanged between the two it paused in a deadlock, as Naruto gripped Heihachi's wrist, stopping him from striking at his heart with an open palm thrust and Heihachi did the same, gripping Naruto's metal-covered hand as the gauntlet's claws were poised to puncture through his chest cavity. Heihachi's brow creased with effort, his years spent off the front line had dulled him some, the boy's physical strength was superior to his experience though, was leveling the playing field. Naruto growled low in his throat, his crimson eyes danced with the embers of the flames as they locked onto Heihachi's pulsing Byakugan. The two tore the gazes away from each other as a rumbling sound reached his ears. Naruto and Heihachi looked to the side as they saw Chooser rolling towards them, his fiery red mane of hair was now longer and stronger, giving him more traction, speed and cutting ability. Heihachi leapt back. Naruto knew Chooser would follow him, and would eventually lead him into Shikito's Kijimane, as he could see the man, fighting through the pain in order to form the seal in preparation for the jutsu. Thinking fast, he did the only thing he knew would keep him out of the Kijimane. He leapt up, and landed atop the rolling Chooser. His shadow was connected directly to the larger man's, if Shikito tried to hold him, he would stop Chooser as well. He pushed chakra into his feet to keep the sharp hairs from cutting them and walked on the rolling ball like a giant hamster wheel. A battle cry to his right caught his attention, he turned, still keeping his balance and saw Inoki approaching with 2 kunai. He raised his gauntlet-covered fist, a clang of metal was heard as he used one gauntlet to block one kunai and caught the man's wrist with the other. Throwing him aside he managed to turn in time to block Sume's attack, her, now sharpened claws swiping away at him. If only for the sake of his stability on the roiling meat tank that was Chooser, Naruto kept his ground, refusing to move back at all. He was lucky that he had the center of the rolling pinball, unlike Sume and Inoki, as they both had been standing on the edges of him, a much more difficult area to keep a good footing on. Which was revealed as Sume lost her footing and fell forward. Naruto seized the opportunity, raising his knee up, she slammed right into his toughened kneecap with enough force to send her up, and falling onto her back instead of her stomach. But he wasn't finished, he raised his metallic hand, the nail-like claws on the piece of armor ready to pierce her like a stuffed pig when Kodomaru lunged at him, the canine's fangs biting deep into his forearm. He growled, using his other arm he latched onto the annoying dog's throat and with a horrible crunch, his bite slackened. Naruto threw him aside like an old rag. He turned again, this time kicking away Nara Shikito before he could deliver whatever attack he wished. He turned again, this time coming once again, face to face with Hyuga Heihachi. The wielder of the famed, all-seeing eye, managed to deliver a hard palm thrust. He felt his stomach clench and spasm as wounds appeared on his navel. He coughed up blood, the coppery liquid staying on his lips and dripping through the bottom of the face mask. However, this momentary opening allowed Heihachi to gain a better footing on the rolling Akamaki as Naruto was forced back. Again the two exchanged blows, blocking and parrying as required while trying to seize openings in the other's attacks or defenses. However, their exchange was cut off as Chooser slammed into one of the walls of the clan estate, catapulting both off of him, along with chunks of wood and boulders that made up the wall. Naruto righted himself in midair and turned, gaining momentum, he swung his leg, slamming it into a rock the size of a footrest or small coffee table. The large stone was rocketed towards the enlarged Akamaki, slamming right into his side. Though the thickened hair took the brunt of the attack, his transformation was undone. He rolled on the ground a few times before coming to a dazed stop. Naruto then spun around again in mid-air, with the use of his wind chakra, and kicked the Hyuga clan head right in the ribs with a brutal drop kick, sending him crashing into the burning estate. Tsuuga. Tsume slammed right into his back, the full force of the Inuzuka's signature attack catching him off guard. The woman's claws tore away at him, his blood seeped from the newly created wounds. He was shot down into the building, into a different part of the compound from where Hiashi had fallen. As he hit the floor, he ignored the flames around him and rolled forward, getting to his feet and unsheathing his sword. Tsume fell through a moment later. Her features feral and her eyes lit up with fury. The thought of her now dead partner Kodomaru adding to her rage. She saw a shadow slip off down the hallway. The flames burning the compound were affecting her vision and the smoke was getting in the way of her sense of smell. The sound of burning wood also affected her hearing. But she paid no heed to this in her anger and rushed after the shadow. When she reached the end of the hall and turned, her eyes widened at the collapsed hallway. She hadn't heard a crash, so that meant it was there before. No one could have gotten past that. She heard a slight sizzling sound and looked down to a small exploding tag. She leapt back, but couldn't avoid the blast entirely. The shrapnel and splinters pierced her arms as she crossed them in front of her in hopes of blocking it. She fell back into the hallway. She opened her eyes and saw another exploding tag on the ceiling directly above her. Her eyes widened before the tag went off and the ceiling collapsed overhead. Naruto emerged from the shadows of the hallway, his form like a specter. Flames danced around his feet and seemed to part for him, allowing passage as he approached the fallen clan head. Tsume's breaths were ragged and uneven. A jagged pipe fell from the ceiling and had pierced the right side of her chest. She was visibly struggling to keep breathing. Her eyes were dilated and unfocused. As she approached, she turned her fading eyes onto him. Somehow, she had managed to gather the strength to speak. "Please," she gasped. "Stop this. It will end in failure." And as such, she gasped her last. Naruto stared at the woman. His red eyes, though burning with unholy flames from the demon's chakra, were cold and unflinching as he stared at her now dead form. He said nothing as he stepped past her. Down the hallway, flames would consume the remains and leave nothing but ash. Shikito and Inoiki staggered over to the large form of one Akamaki Chooser. The overly large man groaned weakly as his two comrades helped him into a sitting position. What happened? The Uzumaki managed to hit you with a big rock and threw Hiashi into the estate. Tsume hit him and he also fell into the house. She followed after him. The large Akamaki managed to stand. "Damn it, what the hell are you two doing helping me? We have to save her," he said angrily. The other two stood and together they began running towards the house. An explosion sound reached them, making them run faster. Then a second explosion hit. When they were finally in leaping distance of the roof, the entire wall exploded in a great blast. The three crossed their arms in front of themselves in order to block the debris and shield their eyes from the heat. When they looked up again, the fear in their hearts multiplied as they stared at Naruto standing above the burning ruins. Crimson flames seemed to tower behind him, like a great wall from hell itself, his face, invisible, beneath his hood. His blade gleamed in red light. Chooser felt fear grip his heart at his next question. "Tsume. Where is Tsume?" Naruto remained silent before he responded. "Dead." His fists cracked as he clenched them. His rage was almost visible in his eyes as well as the eyes of Inoiki and Shikito. "You fucking monster." He was almost frothing at the mouth. Tsume had been a good friend of his, for many years. I'll kill you." His voice was a hateful whisper, but became an enraged yell. "You fucking bastard, I'll kill you." In a second, Chooser had placed the first of his clan pills into his mouth. His chakra tripled and Naruto's eyes momentarily widened in surprise. He pulled out a full tail of the Kyuubi's chakra to supplement his own power until he would still be above the Akamaki's chakra output. He was surprised, however, at the extreme speed boost the red-haired Akamaki had as the man appeared next to him and delivered a solid fist to his face. It hurt. A lot. Naruto flew to the side of the building, his back cracking as bones gave way. He grunted and again felt Kyuubi's chakra mend and heal, even as the bone fragments remained in his back. Before he could move, Chooser was upon him, his fists flying, hitting his right cheek, then his left, then his right, his left again. His face mask shattered, showing his bruised cheeks that were quickly healing. His mouth opened to take in air, showing broken and knocked out teeth which he quickly spit out lest he choke. New teeth regenerated quickly. Chooser, seeing the damage he delivered completely undone in mere seconds, screamed in rage. Growing his right hand out, he slammed it into the blonde, pinning him against the wall, using the full weight of the Akamaki's jutsu to crush him against the wood splinters and concrete rubble. Naruto struggled to breathe, his breath coming out in short, quick pants as the Akamaki continued to crush him. His ribs soon snapped under the strain, coming dangerously close to his heart and piercing his lungs. He focused as best he could, forming and molding the red chakra as it formed tendrils that went over Chooser's hand and stabbed into his forearm, trying to push him back. The red-haired man screamed, and struggled against the pain, trying to continue pushing down on the blonde as the red chakra began pushing him off. The Akamaki cursed and put the second pill in his mouth as Naruto's chakra tendrils spread and pierced his stomach and legs. His muscles doubled in size and his chakra output tripled. He ignored the injuries and crushed him with renewed vigor. Naruto grit his teeth and again struggled to breathe. As he attempted to take another breath, he suddenly felt a grip tighten on his neck. He snapped his eyes open and shifted his eyes down, seeing a shadow clenching around his neck. He felt the edges of his vision grow dark. Anoiki. Fry this fucker's brain. Chooser yelled, coughing up blood. The blonde-haired man nodded before forming another set of hand seals. Naruto felt the presence enter his mind, his eyes rolled to the back of his head as he finally passed out. Chooser, Shikito and Anoiki each breathed a sigh of relief. Just before they each felt his chakra spike again. The three teammates looked at the blonde as his head snapped up, his hood falling back revealing his blonde hair and crimson eyes. Yet these eyes were different, where once they held nothing but cold apathy, now they were dancing with sick insanity and bloodlust. His teeth shined as a psychotic grin spread across his features, his fangs growing until they were practically touching his lower lip. His chakra spiked again and the Akamaki suddenly screamed in pain as red chakra spikes exploded from the blonde's entire body, piercing his arm with the jagged thorns. He cursed and was about to place the third and final pill in his mouth when Naruto appeared in front of him and harshly grabbed him by the mouth, pulling the taller man down so he was at eye level. He chided, his insane grin widening before he plunged his fists through the man's chest. Chooser gave a small jerk before his form slackened. Anoiki and Shikito's eyes were wide in horror as they saw their friend's body tossed aside. The Kyuubi's Jinchuriki's smile never left his face as he turned to them. The flames behind him once again covered his face in shadow, only his softly glowing eyes and wicked smile were visible. He slowly brought his blood-covered gauntlet up to his lips and licked some of the crimson liquid off of it. His insane grin never leaving. I must thank you humans. Had you not weakened him, I would have never been allowed free. It's been so very long since I've tasted human blood. Shikito and Anoiki's eyes widened in pure terror. Kyuubi, the shadow user asked. The demon chuckled. The fear he could feel coming from them was almost palpable, filling his senses. He savored it like a fine wine, enjoying every second of it. Correct human, the stress on his body, and especially his mind, was far too much for him to handle at one time. Giving me temporary control, at least till he recovers. I must thank you especially for that human. He gestured to Anoiki. Were it not for your mind attack, his defenses would have never weakened enough for me to take over. He laughed as Anoiki seemed to pale. Now then, I have a limited amount of time. He threw off his gauntlets and took a stance, his natural claws spread wide as if he was leaving him an opening. He licked his bloodied fangs, enjoying the metallic coppery taste. And I want to make the most of it. Hiashi groaned as his mind returned to the conscious realm. He clutched his head and stumbled slightly as he stood. His eyes blearily looked around before he regained his bearings, noticing he was in the south wing of the compound. The building was burning all around him. The roof collapsed behind him. He jumped and turned around. He looked up and saw a silhouette of a human, hidden by shadows, glowing eyes and gleaming fangs glaring back at him. He took out some kunai and threw them, but the figure merely vanished as the knives hit him. Hiashi activated his Byakugan. Again a sound was heard behind him, close. Too close in fact he spun around, in time to see a shadow run into a room. He dashed after it but as he was going to enter the doorway a small explosion collapsed the hallway. He jumped back and felt the bite as 3 claws slashed his side. He gasped and held his wound, gritting his teeth. He took a slight step back where the floor gave way. He stumbled, falling on his back. He stood up again, hearing laughing sounds coming from all around him. He stood and glared, looking all around the hall for any sign of him. "Show yourself, you coward," he yelled. "As you wish." Hiashi gasped, spun around, was grabbed by his throat and slammed into the wall. He gasped, trying to breathe. He struck the tenketsu in his arm and struck his chest, hoping to loosen the boy's grip. He looked down at the sick grin on the boy's face. "HN, foolish Hyuga. I'll enjoy this," the fox said with sick glee before twitching his wrist to jerk the man's head to the side, exposing the base of his neck. The Hyuga head's eyes widened as the boy moved in and bit down at the junction between his neck and his shoulder, biting deep into the artery. He gurgled once before the blonde yanked with his teeth, pulling a whole chunk from his neck. Blood fountained from the injury, hissing as it met the burning wood. He died seconds later as the demon fox savored the taste. "HN, my fun is almost over, I see," he said to himself as the edges of his eyes began to turn blue. "I hope you enjoy what I drank, fool boy." The eyes turned blue completely and a fierce scowl formed on his features. He spat out the blood and wiped it with his sleeve. "Damnable creature," he snarled, both at his lack of control and the disgusting taste in his mouth. He stared at the dead clan head for a moment before he turned and left, leaving the body to the flames. From ashes to ashes. It had been 3 days since the end of the Konoha Civil War. The list of dead were in the hundreds. The list of wounded hadn't been compiled yet. After the defeat of the Hyuga clan, Naruto organized whatever troops he could and placed them on guard duty in and around Konoha to keep any from leaving, and to keep spies from entering. The longer he could keep news of the civil war under wraps, the better. It came as something of a surprise, the boon that Naruto had been granted by Danzo's death, however. The dead had been gathered by the survivors of Danzo's route Anbu, a group which was far easier to keep in line now that the old warhawk was dead. They were also quite obedient now that they had no master to follow. They were fast becoming Naruto's primary black ops specialist. He was tasking them above most to keep the reports of the carnage he had caused under wraps, especially that of the clan heads. He had also acted accordingly, accepting missions no lower than C rank and no greater than B rank to keep the currency flowing while hiding the ninja he was assigning the missions as Chunin, when in reality they were Anbu and Junin from both his faction and the surviving route Anbu. While their currency had been cut nearly by half of their former intake, Naruto estimated that if they could keep word of their condition a secret for at least 2 weeks, the next stages of his plan could be taken into action. He stood from his chair in what had now unofficially become his office. The Hokage's office, so as not to stir up unwanted resentment from some of the remaining citizens. He had decided to wait before declaring himself the Gondime. He remembered what had happened just the other day when he had stepped into this office again after the Hyuga estate. Jiraiya had been waiting for him, his clothes slightly torn and bloody from the battle he had been involved in. Flashback. The Toad Sannin stared at the blonde teenager's slightly disheveled appearance and tossed him a hat that was on the table beside him. Naruto caught the piece of headwear with a lazy hand and stared at it blankly, the symbol of fire staring right back at him. He looked back at the Toad Sannin. "Congratulations," he said simply. "HN," Naruto said, staring at the symbol for a good long while, NT really knowing what to say or feel. The Toad Sannin stood and walked up to the blonde. Placing an arm onto his shoulder, he spoke seriously. "I think, if you ever feel like you don't know what to do, just ask yourself, what would he do in this situation? And the answer will come to you." That said, he continued walking, opening and closing the door with a soft click. Flashback end. He looked over to the hat that rested at a stand. He stood and walked over to it. He took the article of clothing and stared at it again for a few moments. "Am I worthy of this?" he silently contemplated. He walked to the balcony and stared out at the city of Konoha. He remembered that he had done this once before. A few years ago when Sarutobi was still in office. Back then the streets were vibrant with life. Now, however, it was all but barren. People stayed in their homes, fear keeping them in place. He narrowed his eyes slightly at that. He turned and replaced the hat again on its stand. Not yet. He turned and sat down at the desk. No, He would not wear it yet. Hinata, Hanabi and several Hyugas that were formerly from the branch house stared at the charred remains that was once the pristine estate of the mighty Hyuga clan. Now reduced to a smoking, blasted ruin. Hinata knelt and wiped some ashes from a picture on the floor before picking it up. Seeing it was a picture of one of the branch members, she set it on the night table, leaving it there for whoever might want it. She silently walked through the halls of the estate, her sister and 2 other branch members following her. She was now the clan head, something she was forcing her mind to wrap itself around. She moved past the splinters that remained of the door that led into the council chamber of the Hyuga elders. Bloodstains and slash marks as well as small craters caused by explosive notes marred the inside of the circular chamber. She looked at the walls for a long while, seeming in silent contemplation. Hanabi looked down sadly. It seems so much colder now, she remarked, rubbing her left forearm. One of the older branch members, a man in his mid-60s with thinning grey hair and short goatee, spoke. Yes, it does seem so. Another, even older man spoke up. He had a bushy mustache and large beard that reached his chest. His name was Kojihiro. It is not as it was, he remarked, walking up the stairs with the sound of his cane hitting the white marble floor echoing from the walls. No, it isn't, Hinata said, kneeling and picking up a small stone and pushing it aside, revealing a white flower that had survived the massacre. She smiled sadly. But, perhaps, that is for the best. Kurenai's eyes were slightly teary as she walked into the hospital room of one Sarutobi Asuma. Machines were hooked up to him and his face was incredibly pale, his head was mostly wrapped in bandages, only the left side was visible, his 2 arms were in casts as well as a brace to keep his waist from shifting, along with a cast on his left ankle and right femur. She shed some tears looking down at him on this state. She let her eyes travel to the clipboard at the edge of his bed. Name: Sarutobi Asuma. Rank: Junin. Age: 28. Severe contusion, fracture in the left collarbone, both forearms suffering multiple fractures, left hip bone has been shattered along with the left ankle and right femur. Current condition: comatose. Expected time of recovery: unknown. She let her tears fall down her pale cheeks before walking over and sitting down on one of the chairs. Letting her hand grip his. He did not respond. Oh fuck me. That was the cry of pain that tore its way out of the throat of one Yumino Iruka as Anko broke his left forearm, which had been placed back together by an amateur medic nin who had done a piss poor job of it. Oh, quit being such a little bitch, I barely touched you, she said, shaking her head. Barely touched me. Look woman, I don't know if you break your arm in 3 places every day for fun, but I'm actually sane. He yelled at her as his forehead dribbled with sweat. Anko smirked and her eyes flashed with a deadly gleam in them. Oh, you don't think I'm sane, Iruka-kun? She asked in a sickeningly sweet voice that sent chills up and down his spine. But still he glared at her. You're following that lunatic, so yeah, you have a few screws loose. Anko shrugged. He killed Orochimaru, so it really doesn't matter to me what he does from here on out. So you'll follow him even if he leads us to another great war? He asked with a raised eyebrow. She smirked. He killed that snake. So, yeah, I'm with him until the end, no matter how this plays out. A Hyuga walked in through the door. Anko-san. Naruto-sama requests your presence, he said, bowing. She nodded and stood. As she made it to the door, she paused. And who knows, a world of peace might be good for a change, she said before leaving the academy teacher alone. Iruka looked thoughtful for a moment before he leaned back on his bed and looked to the ceiling. A world of peace, huh? Kakashi sipped a bit of sake from his saucer. Want another? He asked as he extended the saucer to Guy, who sat across the table from him. The green beast nodded and took the saucer, pouring himself some more of the alcoholic beverage. He shoved it down in one huge gulp. So, what now? He asked, somewhat subdued. Kakashi shrugged. We made our choice. Now we gotta play it out till the end. Guy sighed. Kakashi looked at the green-clad Junin. You're worried about your students, aren't you? He nodded. Kakashi swirled his sake. Leave them be for now. Time is the only thing that can heal that particular wound. He drank through his mask. They'll be fine. Guy nodded, pouring himself another drink before smirking at the copy ninja. You do realize I defeated more opponents than you did in that last battle, don't you? Did you say something? Kakashi said, peeking up from his book. G-A-A-A-A-A-A-A-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. D-A-M-N-Y-O-U Hataki. he yelled, startling the birds in a 5-mile radius. Tenten knelt, setting down a bundle of flowers on a small simple collection of stones Lee and herself had placed. Also on the stones was a picture with the third teammate, Neji. Tenten felt tears prick the back of her eyes and bit her lip in order to keep from crying out. Lee saw the girl's shoulders tremble slightly and placed a comforting hand on her. Come on, Tenten-chan. I'll take you home. Naruto sat in his desk in the middle of the night, staring absently at the bright moon that hung over the city of Konoha. His hood was down but his mask was still in place. A knock was heard at the door. Enter, he commanded. The door opened, revealing the former Sound 5 along with one Hatake Kakashi and one Materashi Anko. Good, you're all here, he remarked, standing, tossing Kakashi one scroll and Kimimaro another. The two elites caught the scrolls and looked at them. They stared back at their leader, who began to explain. Oto is all but non-existent with the loss of Orochimaru. You 5 were influential when he still held power. You are to go and recruit ninja. He said, looking to the 5 former Sound ninja. You are not to return here until you have a force of at least 30 at minimum. Am I understood? He asked with authority. They each nodded. Good. Now Hatake and Materashi. Your mission is simple. You are to infiltrate Kiri. Disguise yourselves, I don't care as what. Kiri has been locked in a civil war for over a decade. You are to go and discover which side has the greater chance of victory as well as which side is the more complacent of the two. Report back here in 2 months' time. You all leave by at least 2 days' time. They each bowed and left the room. Naruto leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, settling himself into a meditative state. More plans needed to be made. Hinata calmed her breathing as she stood in front of the waterfall behind her family estate, practicing her water-based techniques. It always calmed her after a troublesome day, and today was no different. The position of clan head and all of the responsibilities that presented themselves with it. Naruto had essentially left Hyuga affairs within the Hyuga affairs. Meaning essentially that she had to oversee the reconstruction herself. She sighed. When a rustle in the leaves to her right was heard, she took a stance with the Juken. Who's there? She recognized the intruder. Shino, she asked with a raised eyebrow. What the hell was her former classmate doing here? Her question was answered as he held up a small jar. The bug colonies of my clan suffered casualties. I've been assigned to help recruit some more. Oh, she said simply. As an awkward silence descended upon him, she resisted the urge to shuffle from foot to foot. Finally, after several seconds, she spoke. Do you need help? My Byakugan can find the bugs faster, maybe. He pushed his glasses up and she twitched in annoyance. In case you didn't notice, Shino, it's the middle of the night, there's no need for glasses. She didn't say this and merely kept quiet. Finally, after a moment, he spoke. If it is not too much trouble. She smiled and nodded. Near Suna, the group of Genin, civilians and some Chunin and Hyuga main branch members that had managed to escape the massacre trekked through the Dune Sea of Wind Country. Hannah was carrying a small child that had collapsed from exhaustion. They had been moving for 3 days straight. They were exhausted both physically and mentally. Ino, who hadn't stopped crying, was being helped by Shikamaru, while Chuji and Sakura helped the civilians as best they could. The Chunin were in front and the remaining main branch Hyuga were covering the rear, keeping their Byakugans active in order to make sure no pursuit parties caught them by surprise. Suddenly, however, the sand seemed to sprout up in a great wall to the rear, right and left of the group. The civilians panicked, the ninja drew their weapons, but all eventually found their eyes on one Sabaku no Gara, who stood at the only opening available to them. Konoha Shinobi. He spoke, his voice calm and collected. You have some explaining to do. Meanwhile, somewhere in the forests, a young girl staggered across the foliage, her form covered in sweat, blood, dirt and leaves. Her hair, matted against her forehead in deep red and brown, showing the dried blood on it. She held crystalline blue eyes, her right arm was twisted at an awkward angle and her breathing was labored. Every step she took was more painful than the last, as if someone was taking fire and running it up her leg each time her foot touched the ground. Her lungs burned like the flames that had consumed her mother. Each movement brought a sharp pain that coursed through her arm with every abrupt movement it made. Like the blade that had cut down her father. She tripped and collapsed, no longer having the strength to stand. She merely lay there, as her breathing became shallower and the edges of her vision darkened. Dark, like the black void one stared at when they looked upon him. Her head throbbed with pain, as if someone was pressing down on her skull with crushing force, like the gauntlet that had crushed her brother's skull. She blinked, and as she opened her bleary eyes again, a dried leaf colored a fiery orange-red fell before her. Red, like the eyes of the demon that had taken her family. As her eyes rolled to the back of her head and her consciousness finally left her, she barely heard a faint call of Sunad-sama, before, nothing. In the village of Suna, the Konoha refugees had set themselves up in the market district. Due to the circumstances, the council of Suna had provided their rooms free of charge until they were able to reach a decision. Inuzuka Hana walked into the room that was shared between her and her brother. He was sitting cross-legged at the edge of the window. Kamaru was laying on his belly, in subdued silence on his lap as Kiba absently scratched his head. Hana stepped forward, her footsteps echoing quietly off the walls. Kiba suddenly spoke up. She's not coming, isn't she? Hana looked to her feet, trying to push back the tears as pain shot through her chest. She knew the reality of the situation. Most of their family had been cut down, only Kiba, herself, and 3 more Inuzuka remained, along with whatever others had sided with the opposing faction, which was about a dozen or so. She silently walked to her little brother and wrapped him in a hug. He clasped one of his hands over hers, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hold back tears. Hana placed her forehead on the base of his neck as tears leaked from her eyes as well. Akamaru whimpered in sadness as the salty scent reached him. He nudged Kiba's hand, offering what little comfort he could. Shikamaru sighed as Chuji, himself and Sakura stared at the blonde-haired girl who had not spoke a single word since their arrival. Not even her mother, who was equally distraught, had managed to get her to speak. Shikamaru had become something of a support for his teammates, hiding the pain of his father's passing in order to help them cope, letting his tears fall only when he was alone or in the middle of the night, in his sleep. Chuji was still in a form of shock, or perhaps disbelief, and still hadn't been able to fully wrap his mind around his own father's death. He knew, somewhere in the back of his mind he knew that even when they were talking in the Hyuga mansion that it was his way of saying goodbye. He just couldn't accept it. Sakura had been trying in her own way, helping him out, being that her parents were civilians they left with the group. She felt terrible for her friends. She didn't know what to say or do really. What could she really say? She couldn't say she understood, because she knew she didn't. Her parents were both alive and were volunteering in the hospital to help treat some of the remaining injuries the survivors had. Right now she didn't understand their pain, and so she wouldn't pretend to. Chuji moved to step forward, but Shikamaru's hand on his shoulder stopped him. He turned to his lazy friend with a confused gaze, but he merely shook his head. I'll deal with it. He sighed tiredly. Sakura nodded and grabbed Chuji's hand. Come on, Chuji. Let's leave them alone and see if we can help out at the hospital. Yeah, sure, he absently said, walking alongside her, waving at Shikamaru, who waved back. Shikamaru sighed again as they left and he walked into the room. He sat down at the edge of the bed, next to her. Ino, he prodded. She gave no answer. He sighed. Ino, come on, this is unhealthy, he said, holding back his customary mutter of troublesome. She still gave no answer. He sighed. He then stood to leave, but her voice stopped him. Why did they stay behind? He paused and sighed again. Because, if they ran, the enemy force would have caught up to us. They had to protect us. She bowed her head, placing her forehead on her knees, letting her blonde hair cascade forward like a platinum waterfall. So, it's our fault. Shikamaru snapped his head to her. He walked around the bed and sat in front of her. He firmly but gently gripped her shoulders. Ino, listen to me. He paused, trying to find the right words. Your dad loved you, right? She nodded. Don't you think he would be angry at you for blaming yourself for his death, when there was clearly nothing you could do? But, Ino, he firmly cut her off. There was nothing you could do, there was nothing anyone could do. He said, somehow both for himself as well as for her. She muffled a sob in her throat as her shoulders shook. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair, she continued to repeat over and over again as she shook her head. Shikamaru slowly wrapped his arms around the girl as she continued to cry. Slowly he felt her arms wrap around his waist as she buried her face in his chest and wept bitter tears of loss. Meanwhile, in the Suna council chambers, several individuals were locked in an argument. These recent events make it abundantly clear that we must reinstate our alliance with the Leaf Village immediately. If the eyewitness accounts have any merit at all, then that means they possess a ninja that can single-handedly wipe out at least 1/3 of our ninja. Not to mention that a good portion of the ninja he faced were those of the renowned Hyuga clan. If we could somehow arrange a political marriage, then surely. Are you insane, man? Another cried out, cutting him off. This fool intends to lead war across the nation. If we ally with him, then we will surely be dragged into this war which is impossible to win. What we must do is attack Konoha now while they are weak. It is the perfect opportunity to increase our influence along the Central Forests region. We could nearly double our income. No, you fool, even if we somehow are victorious against this new cage they have, we must also defeat Jiraiya of the Sannin and copy Ninja Kakashi. Surely even if we win, our forces will be so decimated it will take years to get back our former strength. It is reported that this is the same individual that managed to defeat Gaara-sama. The entire room grew silent at that. It was no secret that none of their ninja could beat Gaara. That a Konoha ninja was capable of such still left a bitter taste in their mouths. Some of the council members turned to the young redhead who had been watching the proceedings from a seat he held, from time to time, now that his father was dead. Gaara-sama, one man queried. You will be taking the title of Kazekage in a few months' time. What do you think of this? Gaara remained silent for a moment, contemplating the pros and cons of such a decision. While he did feel some form of personal respect and even a debt to Konoha's Jinchuriki as the future Kazekage, he had to put the safety of his village before his personal beliefs. This decision was quite literally the future of Suna. This could either go off magnificently, or it could all just blow up in his face. He had to be very careful in this. He took a deep breath and spoke. As of right now, there are still too many variables. Too many complications that could appear due to either decision. I suggest a wait-and-see approach. Depending on future events, we will make our decision then. He spoke calmly. Mutters were heard throughout the room, some positive, some negative. He didn't really care that much. As long as they remained in line, they could say whatever the hell they wanted. What will we do with the refugees? Gaara sighed. Should Konoha shinobi come looking for them, then we will hand them over. Until that time, we will provide refuge for them. More mutters were heard. He ignored them all as he stood. I assume that is what you wished me to discuss with you. If that is the case, then I take my leave. He turned and walked out the door, leaving the councilmen to themselves. Temari sighed tiredly as she flopped down on her bed. All day she and Kankuro had been assigned the D-rank mission of getting the civilians into their quarters and helping carry the injured and near dehydrated individuals to the hospital. Her hands still felt the sting of wooden slivers as she had carried the damn stretcher to and fro for about an hour. Before she could drift off to sleep, a voice from the corner of the room reached her ears. Tired. She jumped about 3 feet in the air, which is remarkable considering that she was laying down. She fell off the bed and into a tangled heap of limbs and sheets at the edge of the bed. She glared up at her brother's look of boredom. Don't do that, she ground out through gritted teeth. Gaara merely raised an eyebrow. Do what? Temari snarled before picking herself up from the ground and sitting on the bed. What the hell do you want now? Gaara sighed and leaned back on the chair. So, you think it's the same guy? Temari stiffened before looking away. Red hood, black clothes, 2 swords and gauntlets. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's him. She muttered. That Konoha ninja was one she would never forget. Gaara sighed. He wasn't even the official Kage yet and already he was hating the job. It was so much easier just to be an underling. The boss pointed and he crushed whatever it was in his hand. Simple. Why did he take this job again? He sighed and looked to Temari. What do you think I should do? She sighed, laying back on her bed. I don't know. You're no help, Temari. He muttered, I wonder. He sighed after a while, catching her attention. What? She said. A world of peace, is it at all possible? He said almost wistfully as he stared at his hand. Temari looked at her brother oddly for a moment before sighing. Gaara, it might be, but it's a long shot, especially with his methods. Gaara continued to stare at his hand until finally, after a good long moment, he spoke. If there is ever a world of peace, then people like me and him won't exist anymore. Temari stiffened and looked to her brother. She wanted to speak, but the words simply slipped past her as he opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone to her thoughts. Meanwhile, somewhere along the borders of Konoha and Kumo, someone was beginning to wake up. The young girl groaned as she opened one of her exhausted blue eyes. She raised her hand to touch her head, but gasped as her hand came in contact with the rough texture of a bandage. Her eyes snapped open and she scanned the relatively plain room. She began to panic slightly as she didn't recognize her surroundings. She took a deep breath and thought. All right, don't panic. Calm down and figure out where you are, then you can panic all you want. She made her plan and tried to sit up, but the action proved to be far more difficult than she expected. Finally, after almost 30 seconds of struggling with her sore muscles and aching bones, she was finally able to sit up, panting and sweating from the stress to her battered body. She couldn't believe how much effort that took. Again, her lungs seemed to burn with each breath she took. She heard the door open and she turned her head in time to see a woman with short black hair enter. She was startled when she saw her up and rushed to her bedside. "Oh my, I didn't expect you to be up yet. Please lie down again, you have to rest. The muscle relaxants in your system still haven't worn off, and if you exert yourself too much you may damage your muscle ligaments more than what they already are." The girl allowed herself to be placed back down on the bed and coughed a little. "Where?" The woman's eyes softened. "My name is Shizune, you're in a hotel in a small town along Kumo's borders. What's your name?" Aki, N.A. Her eyes fluttered closed and she once again fell back asleep. Shizune sighed as she ceased the flow of chakra into the girl. She certainly didn't expect that she would wake up so soon. She should have been out for about 2 or 3 more days. Her wounds were serious, a minor concussion, the right elbow was fractured, a large gash along her stomach, just barely missing her organs, her left ankle was also sprained badly, and she was suffering a terrible case of exhaustion. The door opened again, revealing a woman with long blonde hair in 2 pigtails. "How is she?" Shizune sighed. "Well, she woke up." Tsunade looked startled. "That shouldn't have happened." Shizune sighed. "Yeah, well, she was sitting up and looking around when I walked in." Tsunade mused as she sat down. "I wonder what happened." Shizune plopped down and absently petted Tun as he walked up to her. "Whatever it was, it must have been bad." Tsunade nodded and absently sipped some sake. They wouldn't get answers until she woke up. Naruto absently read a report from some ninja that had gone to AC rank mission when Jiraiya leapt in from the balcony. "You called," he said, rubbing his eyes. The old pervert was no doubt sleeping. Naruto looked at Jiraiya before speaking. "I want you to find your old teammate, ask her to join us." Jiraiya stiffened. "And if she refuses, then make sure she will at least not get in our way." The Toad-Sannin sighed in relief. He wouldn't have ever hurt Tsunade, not even on his order. He nodded and leapt away. Naruto went to look through another file when he noticed the tower was eerily silent. He stood and walked to his door. He opened the door and noticed the Anbu guards and the administration employees were all knocked out, sprawled on the floor completely unconscious. There was no smell of blood in the air, meaning most likely that no one was dead. He looked down the hall and noticed a blue-skinned man with a large sword on his back. He recognized him almost immediately, the monster of Kiri, Hoshikage-kisame. He turned his head slightly and peeked back into his office from the corner of his eye and saw another individual standing behind his desk. Uchiha Itachi. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.